Hi, Nat.
Hi, Mac.
How are things going?
Good. It's
Yeah,
Friday. It's
yeah,
December.
it is.
It's, yeah.
And the year is nearly over, and we haven't done one of these in a while. So,
Mm,
yeah,
yeah. And then we are stepping into, we don't know where this is going to go. We're just going non-linear and just seeing where it takes us, which I'm quite looking forward to.
yeah, me too. Me too. Well, I think one of the things we could talk about. Uh, I recently had a painting commissioned, and so you can see the wall. There are these like little small ones, and I don't know something in me was like, it feels like there's a great wall for something like really beautiful to be made. And so I asked my friend who's an artist, Kat Jones, if anybody's interesting, and she's based in Phuket. And had a painting for me a number of years ago. Or actually, I just bought one of her paintings and I loved it. And so I asked her to do a painting. And so I'll show you guys the painting in the edit. And it was interesting because when I saw the painting, and Nat, you've seen the painting, the first reaction that I had was like, oh, like it feels so sad. And I was like, and then you asked this great question, like, well, what was the brief? And I was like, oh, I don't even remember what the brief was, but I'm looking at it and I feel sad. And she even wrote like, this is probably not what you expected. And I was like, oh, interesting. I was like, oh, so you also thought that too. And then I went back to listen to read the brief, and I said I wanted something calm and thoughtful, about different perspectives. And it turns out I had a voice note attached to it, and listened again to the voice note. And it talked a lot about essentially like the I think a lot of my mind in July was really stuck in a lot of this idea about polarity thinking, and how many people are really grounded in their polarity, and if it's possible to be curious about a third point that could be more helpful. And so,
Can I ask a question?
mm,
What you mean by many people are grounded in their polarity?
mm, mm, I think my observation about the world is that we think in a very dualistic mentality, right? It's good or bad. It's hot or cold. It's nice or mean. And so we use all these dualities essentially to start forming judgments about the world, judgments about ourselves, judgments about other people.
Hmm.
And we get really attached to those judgments, and we really, yeah, we build our identities off some of those judgments. And then it's reinforced when then people then reflect them back onto us. They're like, oh, Mac, you're just like such a patient person. And I'm like, well, sometimes, most of the time. And then, like my kids are not wanting to go to bed and not that patient.
Hmm.
So I found, especially with some of the coaching work, is that, to people, the one I hear a lot is like, well, if I were more arrogant, then I'd just be like this terrible person. I was like, well, on a scale of 1 to 10, of zero is like not arrogant and 10 is most arrogant, how would you rate yourself? And they're like, one. And I was like, okay. So, like, are you going to become a 10 tomorrow? They're like, no. So, like, what would being a two look like? And they're like, oh. But it's so threatening for them to even move from the one to the two, because they're like, well, that would just be too much. I wouldn't even recognize myself. I was like, oh, interesting. But I think that's some of the polarity thinking that I think is it's helpful and unhelpful, because it's safe in that zone, and then we to grow it feels like we have to take a step sometimes out, and then be able to see the other side and see the shadow. Yeah. Mm.
Even that concept of shadow, light, and our strengths and our shadow is, I think, actually in itself can be quite dualistic, that we have these positive aspects of ourselves and then these kind of hidden, sometimes unconscious parts of ourselves that we might suppress or resist. And I think even that actually can be quite dualistic as well. So I'm wondering about the painting and if we use that as a metaphor. I'm trying to think of what my question is. Well, perhaps we start with your reaction. Describe how you felt when you received it.
I mean, it's so interesting because I've been in, I think, an overwhelmed place over the last, I think we said 6 months. This last 6 months has been overwhelming, just in terms of the priorities that I'm juggling. I know we talk so much about like the meaning is made by the beholder, I think, something like that. Like we're creating our own meaning. And so without the frame of how I briefed her on it, I think my eyes were drawn to the thunder or just sort of the turmoil in the clouds.
Mm.
And I was like, oh, so sad. And then I see the like dripping water off of the sand, and I'm just like, I just feel so like sad and depressing. And it's interesting because after we've started talking about it, and I'm like, no, this is great. I think the the way that she's captured the emotion of the two is actually quite fantastic. So yeah, I don't know. So yeah, the framing is so funny to me. I'm like, oh, but once I can like put on my this is exactly the she's like there was a brief that then yielded this painting. I'm like, oh, interesting. And then now we're having some of this conversation to look at it. I'm like, oh yeah, I can see the perspectives. And I'm looking at the starry sky, and I'm looking at you know the bright sun over in the left hand side.
Mm.
Yeah, quite interesting how that just shifted like so quickly.
What did you notice happening for you?
Oh, that's a great question. I think the part of me that has been feeling overwhelmed just identified with the thunder, and it just was like, yeah, like that's how I feel. Like, how does this picture know? It sees me, it sees my pain. And so then I like really got into that story, and then I let it go, and then I'll and then there's a questioning of like, why am I feeling this way?
Mm.
Like, what's happening? Like, what did I ask for? So then I think that's where I was catching myself like, you shouldn't feel this way. Like, this is something that you wanted, right? So there was some questioning of the like sadness inside. Yeah. And then now it feels like I can be with the sadness, and then I can also have that zoomed out perspective of like, oh, I can see all the beautiful elements
Mm.
of the painting. Whereas I feel like when I first looked at it, I can only see the darkness and the sadness. Yeah. That's interesting. Yeah, that zooming out, I think, is, yeah, it's helpful.
How long did that process? Could you kind of identify how long that process happened?
I mean, it was like right before this call, so I mean, 5 to 10 minutes.
Have you just received it
Yeah, like
today?
I just got the little image. like when we were talking.
Okay.
Yeah.
Really? Oh, you
Yeah.
literally just feel it. Okay.
Yeah. That's why it's so fresh. I'm like, oh, I need to show Nat. And we can have this conversation because I'm so
Yeah.
confused about my reaction. Yeah. Yeah. So
And
it's
what,
all
so it's fresh, very fresh. And what did you notice about, because you played me a bit of the brief, the recorded message. What did you notice when you were listening to that back?
it took me like 45 seconds to actually say something. Well, I think what I'm thinking is if I could really like put my finger on what is really important to me right now, and it just went on. And then I could finally get to this idea that I was percolating. So she must have also been listening to this and be like, what is Mac actually talking about? Yeah. Yeah.
So what was that you noticed, like that in that you were thinking? I could hear you thinking. I could hear you processing. Like what did you notice about what was happening for you?
Mm, I think it felt important to be able to describe this idea. And, I left a voice note because I didn't think that I could type it out.
Mm,
But I think this concept is something that I feel like comes up in my coaching quite a bit. And as this is the background or will be the background of the wall, um, you know, I wanted to at least have something, that when people are looking at the screen, um, maybe it sparks something for them.
mm.
But yeah, and so I think there was a part of me that was like, oh, I need to like be able to encapsulate this like very nebulous abstract idea so that somebody can put it into some sort of creative expression. Yeah, that feels difficult.
Yeah, which is perhaps quite symbolic of what's happening in a coaching session.
Mm.
Because we might be asking the client something and they are just trying to describe their experience. And I wonder whether if we were to paint it back to them, would it be a representation of what we heard? And where does our own meaning making then come into that interpretation?
Yeah, yeah. And we had this conversation. I feel like I don't know if it was on this call, but we started talking about how much metaphor
Mm,
we bring into coaching, and I feel like I do. I like using metaphor in the playback of like, hey, so what I'm hearing is it sounds like there's this bird, and the bird is coming to the pond, and so I'll like create these stories because I can sort of relate it to something that I don't know, maybe allows them to see the story from a different person or from where they're not the actor in the story. And I know one of the things we've talked about is like the danger of the metaphor,
mm,
right? Because it's my metaphor, it's not their metaphor. And so then I'm now overlaying my metaphor onto their meaning making. And it might be helpful or it might not be helpful. And so then, yeah, that could be, yeah, potentially, yeah, maybe it takes away some of their own power because like I'm now influencing their story as the coach.
mm. And I think that's a really good inquiry. How much do we influence our client's story as their coach? And of course, we are going to, because when you're in dialogue, when you're in the company of somebody, you will be influenced by them. If you're in dialogue, if you're not, then yeah, that would be quite strange. So, yeah, I'm not sure what my question is, but how much do we and should we be an influence in our clients' stories?
Hmm. You know what comes up for me is like it's like all of these childhood stories where the little boy goes to the old man and the old man is sitting on the rock and the little boy is complaining about, I don't know, losing his dog, and then the old man tells him a funny like story to illustrate what's happening to the little boy and his dog, right? And I'm like, oh, interesting. So have we become like the old people sitting on rocks?
Maybe a little bit. Yeah.
you know because we're just replaying back, right? We're replaying
Mm.
back what we heard from the little boy in a
I
way that they can see themselves differently.
and I'm actually reading Jennifer Garvey
Mm,
Berger's book, Changing on the Job. It's over there, which is why I reminded myself of the title. And it's I think it's an older book, but she's updated it and re-released it. And I'm not even a chapter in yet, but something that she said about this work, this developmental work, these stages and some of the frameworks that we talk about, and this notion of meaning making and how our meaning making changes and can change and grow over time. And she says something like, these theories are just to be able to see ourselves well.
mm, mm,
Mm. And I think that is that what we're doing as coaches?
mm,
We're just helping our clients see themselves well. And perhaps the question is, what are we doing that might inhibit that or encourage that,
mm.
expand that?
And the thing that pops into my head is, wow, yes, because I'm trying to see myself. Like, I'm so curious about this existence, which is, I think, why I'm in this work. And then I'm doing it with others, you know? And I think that we've talked about this, like, there's some selfishness in this, like, curiosity that I have. I'm like, oh, like, I really am trying to understand myself, to see myself.
Mm.
And then there's external benefit because then other people get to get the benefit of my my study
Mm.
and understanding. But yeah, I love that, and they have been so helpful. I think that's what I would say.
Yeah, and there's also I saw a comment by one of our coach friends, Laurent, who responded to a post on LinkedIn. His quote was, which I just loved, was, coaching is not a career, it's a quest. And I love that. I was like, my God, it is,
Yeah,
isn't it?
it is. Yeah,
It's a quest.
yeah, it's not easy.
And it's, well, but it's also such a privilege to be on
Mm,
this quest and to be able to be a part of, I guess, other people's quests for a moment in time. So I guess kind of bringing it back to the painting,
mm, mm.
how do you feel receiving that painting and even the process of going through the brief, and how do you feel it helped you see yourself well?
Mm. It's, I mean, in the brief. What's interesting, I think when I first looked at it, I identified with the turmoil that was going on in the clouds. And so that's where I see. I mean, it's interesting because my eyes weren't even drawn to the clarity of the stars. Right? It looked very dark. You know, my eyes were drawn to the middle, essentially, where. And so it's interesting that I think on my quest, I'm going to find myself at all of these stages, right? There's going to be bright, sunny days. There's going to be starry, cloudless nights. And then there's going to be cloudy, thunderstormy days, seemingly unending. And that, I think like in the brief, right? It's just about, you know, where am I? Can I get some perspective? Yeah. Yeah, it's great. I really love it.
Mm. I'm actually really excited to see it
Yeah.
behind your.
Behind the wall. Wow, I'm getting emotional. I'm like crying. Yeah, I'm really excited to get it. I need to go and figure out how I'm going to hang this 2 meter painting on the wall without tearing down the wall. But yeah, maybe the next time
I
we
think
chat.
it's also really testament to how we think about, and then perhaps this will be our last comment for today, but how we think about all that we are bringing to our coaching, and that it isn't just about the questions that we ask or our ability to listen and be present. There is so much more in the background, like metaphorically and physically, that contributes to being with someone on their quest.
Absolutely.
So I'm excited for what your painting does for you, and also kind of evokes for your clients that you work with as well.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Thank you.
I want a
Amazing.
painting now.
Yeah, everyone should go get a painting. It's so
Yeah.
amazing. Yeah, so amazing. Beautiful. Well, thanks for the chat, and thanks for the coaching. That was great.
Yeah, that wasn't that was kind of on the fly.
We'll
Yeah.
be back. Yeah, we'll be back in 2025. I think we're gonna do and hold some inquiries once every 2 months. So if you're interested, look out for an email from us
Mm.
or drop a comment, and we'll get you on our mailing list.
Yeah, we've got a topic ready for the new year, so we're excited to share more about that soon. All
All
right.
right.
Thanks, Mac.
Thank you. See you soon.